Good evening. If you've just joined us, we're continuing our discussion now, just analysing the Finance Minister's medium-term budget. It was not great news, we must tell you, if you missed it. Very ominous indeed, confirming, of course, that we do have a very, very sick economy, and it doesn't seem like we're going to be getting better anytime soon from what we heard from Tito Mboweni earlier. Well, we do have a panel of guests discussing this with us today. We've got Siyabanisa. He is in our Pretoria studios. He's a political economist. With me in studio is Tessa Doom. She's a political analyst with Jasoro Consulting, and Mpotsebe, who is an economist in our Cape Town studio. Rafio Madzena from our Money Desk joining the conversation. Tessa, I'd like to hear from you as somebody watching on the political front. What about this? I mean, we are in general concerned about this economy. I mean, we are in crisis. We don't know as ordinary consumers what to do. For you, what are the red flags from what you heard today?
So for me, I'm always looking out for the people in the lower LSMs, the lower income brackets in the country, and also those who are underemployed and unemployed, and what these budget outlooks mean for them. And I think there's two things that really stand out for me. The one is the question around social spending. And although social spending was mentioned, and that 3 trillion rand that we'll be spending in the next 3 years, the question about the return on investment on social spending, when it comes to health, when it comes to education, when it comes to social grants, when it comes to those places in the economy where we're trying to create social protections and social nets that are supposed to lift people out of poverty and give them a real fighting chance in the economy. And I don't think we have a clear understanding of where that 3 trillion rand is going to go in different ways and get different outcomes from what we've done before. It's not uncommon that we spend a lot on our social spending, as we should, in terms of a base. But I don't think we have a clear picture from this budget, midterm budget speech, about what outcomes we're expecting about that, because really the social outcomes aren't just about social well-being. They really are about economic outcomes at the end of the day, because social actors are the ones that are going to become the economic actors that create the wealth.
And in a week that we received these unemployment figures that are climbing and climbing and climbing, I would have expected to hear a little bit more about that as well.
I mean, I think if you look at the top 10 priorities, jobs is only one of them, and it was jobs specifically in agriculture and tourism.
Yeah.
And I think the idea that you can see through this is the idea that it's going to be companies and corporates that are going to be creating those jobs. Where it falls flat for me is if you're thinking about SMEs and you're thinking about the informal economy, where a lot of trade is happening in those spaces, but there's not a lot of vision and perspective around what we're going to get out of those sectors of the economy. So when we say agriculture and tourism, are we saying with a specific look at SMEs, a specific look at micro enterprises, things like township economies and tourism? So are we really thinking about the lower ends, or are we just thinking about investment from above? We're thinking about big companies, we're thinking about mass absorptions, when in fact every economy in the world has shown us it is the SMEs of our society. And particularly if you look at the countries that he mentioned in Africa, the informal economies of those countries are thriving, and ours isn't.
Well, ours should be. I don't know if we're actually concentrating on those enough. I mean, we've been banging on about that for months, Tessa. Thanks for that. Well, my colleague Rafiwa is also particularly concerned about the taxes, as are we all, Rafiwa. And I mean, you've been chatting to a lot of people about that, and we're supposed to expect more taxes next year. I don't know where I'm going to find it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's very little focus on things like SMEs, but a huge focus on tax and taxing us a little bit more. And Mpa, I just want to get your thoughts on the pronouncements that were made by the Minister around tax and VAT, really not bringing in the revenue we'd like to see, VAT going mostly to refunding taxpayers. The outlook for the revenue provider, I mean, given that it provides around 25% to the country's GDP, what did you absorb from that?
Yeah, so I think the major problem regarding tax revenues is that it's a growth story. So we started the year expecting growth to be much higher than where it's currently sitting. So at the beginning of the year, we were looking at growth forecasts of around 1.5%. We're now sitting with growth likely to average 0.5% this year, if not lower. Now, that has had a major impact on revenue collections, and we're expecting tax revenues to fall short of initial estimates by about 52 billion this year, rising to around 82 billion next year, and 117 thereafter. So those are huge, major revenue shortfalls. And I think the other thing that was highlighted was that given the trajectory of the fiscus, the way it is, it's going to require further tax increases, unfortunately. So there will be some adjustment on the expenditure side, but unfortunately that's not going to be enough to stabilize the country's finances, so which means that consumers can expect further tax increases next year.
But Mpa, I find that very confusing for me because we're going to be increasing. We just done that with VAT, with the 1% increase. And I've just mentioned that a lot of it goes back to tax refunds. When will we start to see the benefits of continuously taxing the taxpayer, given that VAT makes up a big bulk of revenue collection?
Yeah. So the other problem is that it's not only that you're collecting revenues and then it's going to VAT refunds. So that's a normal process, because if you think about it, is that VAT is paid by the end consumers. So corporates just play a middleman. They pay VAT when they purchase goods and services, they process them into final goods and then sell them to consumers, and then collect that VAT from consumers, which they then have to pay to SARS. So it's more of an input-output balancing act that corporates pay. They play the middleman, claim from SARS what they collected from consumers. So that's expected on the VAT refund side. And remember, we also had the SARS commission, where it was indicated that previously SARS was withholding tax refunds that they were supposed to be paying towards small, medium enterprises and corporates in general, which was then affecting their operations. So it's good that we're now seeing SARS is paying off those VAT refunds. They're no longer delaying them, because it then affects the financial operations of other companies. But I think what's more of a negative picture is that if we look at how much is being collected in tax revenues and what that's being spent on. So if we look at the highest increasing item, the fastest increasing item on the expenditure side is interest costs. Now that's quite worrying, because you're taking money from households and corporates. So corporates could be using that money to invest in infrastructure, which will be positive for the economy. Households, on the other hand, could be using that money much more productively as well, buying goods and services, which will also be beneficial for the economy. But if we then look at how that tax is being spent, it's not efficient. Firstly, it's being used to pay off debt. Some of it is foreign owned, which means that we have money leaving the economy. And then on the other hand, you also have a lot of wastage in government in general. Which then, talks to inefficient spending and inefficient allocation of finances.
And we'll continue to talk about that debt and the likes of Eskom and so